Single mom spent her last $10 helping a veteran. Next day, 99 soldiers brought a life-changing gift. The night air carried the sting of early winter as Emily Carter tightened her denim jacket against the wind. The fluorescent lights of the gas station flickered above, humming faintly over cracked concrete. Her old sedan sat beside the pump, engine idling, its tank nearly dry. She counted the last of her money, a single crumpled $10 bill, and sighed. Somewhere faint country music whispered from an old radio inside the station store. The highway behind her stretched empty and cold, a thin silver ribbon disappearing into the Montana dark. Snow drifted lazily from a sky the color of steel. Emily's fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of another long day at the diner. Her son Eli would already be asleep, wrapped in the blanket her husband once brought home from deployment. That thought alone kept her standing. As she reached for the pump, a noise broke through the quiet, a heavy thud, followed by the scraping of gravel. She turned and saw a man collapse near the curb, his duffel bag falling beside him. Dog tags clinked softly as they hit the ground. For a moment she froze, her breath catching in her throat. The man didn't move. Her eyes darted toward the clerk inside the station. He looked up, saw what happened, and went right back to scrolling on his phone. A couple filling their truck at the next pump glanced over and drove away. Emily hesitated, every instinct screaming to stay out of it. But something in her heart, something her late husband had taught her, whispered otherwise. She knelt beside the man. His skin was pale, his breath shallow. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, voice trembling. The faint glint of his dog tags caught her eye. Jake Thompson, it read. His hand pressed weakly against his chest, eyes fluttering open just long enough to meet hers before rolling back. Emily's pulse quickened. He was having a heart attack. She ran inside, grabbed a bottle of water and a small pack of aspirin, tossing her $10 bill on the counter. The clerk scoffed. "Lady, that guy's trouble. You don't owe him nothing." She didn't respond. Rushing back outside, she lifted Jake's head gently and helped him swallow the pills, her hands shaking as she whispered, "Stay with me, please." The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, slow, uncertain, as if the world itself hesitated to care. Jake's fingers clutched hers tightly, surprising her with their strength. "Don't leave," he muttered weakly. "You're safe," she promised, even though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. She stayed there until the ambulance arrived. When the paramedics took him, the clerk called her crazy for wasting her money on a stranger. Emily didn't answer. She just stood there watching the taillights vanish into the dark, snow beginning to fall heavier now. Her gas tank was still empty. She didn't have enough left to drive home. She sat in the car for a long time, staring at the folded flag tucked into the visor, the one handed to her at her husband's funeral. The memory burned in her chest like fire and frost all at once. She whispered, "You'd have done the same thing, wouldn't you, Daniel?" The silence felt like an answer. By the time she finally started the engine, the gas gauge barely lifted from empty. She drove home through the falling snow, the radio crackling with static. Somewhere between exhaustion and peace, a single thought repeated in her mind. She had $10 to her name, and she spent it saving the man who once fought for her freedom. The sun rose pale and tired over Maple Ridge, a town that had once been proud and busy, now hollowed out by years of loss. The diner sign blinked unevenly across from the old post office. Empty storefronts lined the main street, flags faded but still hanging. People here loved their country. They just no longer believed their country loved them back. Emily poured coffee for the regulars that morning, the smell of bacon and grease clinging to her clothes. Conversations drifted around her, talk of bills, layoffs, and the storm expected by nightfall. When the news station on the wall mentioned a homeless veteran rescued outside Miller's Gas, everyone turned to look at her. Forks paused mid-air. "You shouldn't have gotten involved, Emily," said Sheriff Daniels from the counter, adjusting his hat. "Could have been dangerous. These guys ain't right in the head sometimes." His voice was calm, almost sympathetic, but his words stung. She just nodded and went back to wiping the counter, her jaw tight. When she clocked out, her boss pulled her aside. "Don't bring drama into my diner," he warned. "People are talking. Don't make them uncomfortable." Emily bit back a response. All she wanted was to keep her job, keep her son fed, and keep her head down. But that night, as she tucked Eli into bed, he asked softly, "Mom, why is everyone mad that you helped that man?" She didn't know how to answer. She brushed his hair from his forehead and whispered, "Because sometimes doing the right thing makes people uncomfortable." He nodded sleepily, clutching the small wooden flag his father had carved for him years ago. The innocence in his eyes reminded her what courage looked like, unafraid and pure. Outside, the wind howled. She checked her mailbox. Another overdue bill. The landlord's notice about rent fluttered beneath it. Emily pressed her back against the door and exhaled. Guilt gnawed at her stomach. That $10 could have bought breakfast for Eli, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jake's face, that desperate look of someone forgotten by the world. Over the next few days, rumors spread through town. Some called her foolish. Others said she was showing off for sympathy. A few said worse. At the grocery store, a woman she'd known since high school turned away without speaking. It was a small town. Silence could be louder than any insult. One evening, as she walked home from her cleaning job, she noticed a group of teenagers spray painting near the bridge. The words they scrawled glowed in the light of her flashlight. "Not our problem." Emily stopped and stared, the message twisting something deep inside her. She scraped it off with her bare hand until the paint smeared red across her knuckles. That night she stood on her porch and looked out across the frozen street. Somewhere another flag waved limply in the dark. Her husband had once told her, "Real courage is doing right when nobody's watching." She whispered it again, softly this time, like a prayer, then let them watch. Inside, Eli slept soundly, the folded flag above his bed glowing in the faint light of the moon. Emily sat beside him and made a silent promise. She wouldn't let this world teach her son to look away. Whatever came next, gossip, hardship, judgment, she'd face it head on. Because somewhere out there, a man was alive because she cared enough to stop. Morning frost dusted the windshield as Emily scraped a clear circle to see the road. Her breath fogged the glass, a small cloud that vanished as quickly as it formed. The gas gauge hovered near empty, an accusing orange eye that wouldn't blink. She whispered, "Just get us to school," and turned the key until the engine caught. Eli buckled in, sleepy-eyed, hugging his backpack like a life preserver. At the diner, the bell over the door rang with its familiar tinny chirp. The smell of coffee, bacon, and old linoleum wrapped around her like routine. Regulars watched the morning news replay the gas station story in a crawl. No one spoke to her about it, but their silence stacked like plates. She poured refills and kept her eyes on the steam. Sheriff Daniels chose the corner booth and tipped his hat with a sigh. "Just checking in," he said, voice easy but authority tucked beneath. "You didn't know that man, Emily? Could have been violent." "Could be anything." She nodded, set down his eggs, and steadied her hands on the tray. "My son's watching who I become when it's hard," she answered quietly. By 10, her boss pulled her aside near the walk-in cooler. "Hours are tight," he muttered, studying the scuffed floor. "Folks don't want headlines with their breakfast, you understand?" The cut felt like a door closing in slow motion, polite and final. She said, "I understand," and felt her stomach fold. At lunch, she checked her phone between orders and deep breaths. A missed call from an unknown number, then another, then none. Voicemail, a hospital administrator confirming the veteran was stable. She listened twice, relief washing over her like warm sun on snow. Then the message ended, and the cold returned to her hands. After school, Eli ran across the parking lot with a paper flag he'd colored. "I told Mrs. Green you helped a soldier," he said, grinning with pride. Some parents smiled. Others turned away as if from a bright window. Emily knelt to his height and tucked the flag into his backpack. "Dad would be proud of you," she whispered, meeting his clear eyes. The mailbox held a letter with her landlord's name in block print. Inside, a notice firm, final rent due by Friday or expect eviction. The paper felt heavier than its weight, like wet laundry in her hands. She folded it once, then again, until the creases bit her palm. In the kitchen, the light above the sink buzzed and flickered. Night fell thin and sharp, laying shadows over the worn porch boards. Emily counted bills at the table, the stack stubborn and insufficient. Every cost, every mile, every choice laid itself in a neat, accusing row. She pressed her thumb to the $10 gap she couldn't fill. Guilt spoke first. Fear took the chair beside it and stayed. Across town, someone posted about her on the local message board. "Good deed or attention-seeking?" The headline baited a slow crowd. She didn't read it, but the echo reached her through a friend's sigh. That kind of noise could seep under doors, under skin, under resolve. She set her phone face down and lit the stove for tea. Before bed, she stood in Eli's doorway and watched him breathe. The folded flag above his head held midnight like a quiet oath. She remembered the funeral's drumbeat and the weight of ceremony. Then she remembered Jake's hand clutching hers in the snow. Between those memories, she chose which one would lead. Snow started again, fine as sifted flour over the blacktop morning. Emily wrapped a scarf twice around her neck and faced the town. She would make calls, ask for extra shifts, swallow pride where needed. This is how you hold a line: 1 hour, 1 bill, 1 breath. She set her jaw and stepped into the day. At the diner, the regulars practiced careful conversation around her. "Cold one coming," said a rancher as if weather were the only truth. She refilled his cup and caught the television's muted footage of soldiers. Uniforms moved in slow archival footage, all ceremony and distant years. Someone turned the volume down further, until it was memory only. Mid-morning, the clerk from the gas station came in for cigarettes and pie. He recognized her, smirked, and shrugged like none of it mattered. "Crazy night," he said, as if narrating someone else's movie. Emily managed to nod and wrote his ticket in steady numbers. Some people could live without mirrors. She envied the ease. She tried for an extra cleaning job at the old feed store. "Maybe next month," the manager said, eyes apologetic and lined. "Folks are tightening belts. You know how it is." She did no belt holes notched down to the last and still loose. On the walk back, the wind pinned her coat to her ribs. Inside, the ledger on her kitchen table was an honest adversary. Numbers didn't sneer, didn't gossip. They simply refused to budge. Rent stared from one column, overdue utilities from another. She pressed her finger to each line, naming it like an unblinking star. The sky did not answer, but she kept looking up anyway. Guilt used her husband's voice, arriving soft and then sudden. "We gave everything to this country. What did it give back?" She gripped the edge of the sink until the porcelain cooled her skin. Then she breathed and remembered the hospital message. Stable. A life steadied because she spent what she had. That evening she avoided Main Street and walked the back road home. The bridge graffiti had been painted over a clean rectangle, a fresh gray. For a minute she stood and watched the river work at the ice. Under the surface, the current kept its promise to keep moving. She tucked that lesson into her pocket like a small, smooth stone. After dinner, the phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. A calm baritone introduced himself. Colonel Hayes, Honor Home Foundation. He thanked her for helping Sergeant Jake Thompson the previous night. "May I buy you coffee at Miller's Diner tomorrow to talk?" Silence stretched. The foundation's name steadied the empty room. Fear raised its hand first. What if this was a trick, a setup, a cost? But another thought stood taller. What if this was a door? She glanced at Eli, building a tiny fort from couch cushions and blankets. "Dad would have helped him too," he said, not looking up, simple as sunlight. In that light, choices lost their noise and found their shape. Emily wiped her hands on a dish towel and lifted the phone again. "This is Emily Carter," she said, finding a steadier part of her voice. "I can meet you at noon," she added, eyes on the folded flag above the couch. The wind rattled the window. Somewhere a porch flag answered back. Lines were drawn. Tomorrow she would step across them. The diner clock ticked like a heartbeat above Emily's head as she waited. Outside, noon sunlight spilled through the window blinds in dusty stripes. Colonel Hayes arrived on time, a tall man in his 60s with a steady gaze. His handshake was firm but warm, like someone used to leading from the front. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I came to thank you for saving my brother in arms." Emily blinked, unsure what to say. "Jake's alive?" Hayes nodded, a quiet pride softening his weathered face. "You didn't just save a man," he said. "You saved one of America's finest." He explained that Jake had served 2 tours overseas, lost his family, lost everything. "Honor Home helps veterans like him rebuild," Hayes said, sliding her a card. The card felt heavier than paper, embossed with the words *Honor Home Foundation. Its logo, a folded flag forming the shape of a house, made her throat tighten. Hayes spoke about duty, about how America's promise still lived in small towns. "You reminded us what we're fighting for," he said simply. Emily didn't know whether to feel proud or overwhelmed. "Jake asked me to tell you something," Hayes added, reaching for his coffee. "He said you were the first person who looked at him like he was still human." The words cut through the noise of the diner until even the clock seemed to stop. Emily looked down, hands trembling against the chipped ceramic mug. "I only did what anyone should have done," she murmured. "But no one else did?" Hayes smiled sadly. "That's why you stand out." He told her Jake wanted to visit once he recovered, to thank her himself. Outside, the wind rattled the diner sign, and snowflakes drifted like ash. When Hayes stood to leave, he said, "Don't lose faith in this country, Mrs. Carter. Sometimes it just needs reminding who it is." The bell above the door jingled as he left, leaving warmth in his wake. Emily sat for a long time, staring at the business card on the table. The words asterisk, Honor Home Foundation asterisk, echoed in her head like a hymn. People around her whispered, curious but distant. She folded the card carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket. That evening, Eli asked what happened at lunch. She told him about Colonel Hayes, about Jake's survival, about second chances. Eli's eyes lit up, wide with wonder. "So helping people makes the world help back?" Emily smiled faintly. "Sometimes it does. Sometimes it takes time." He nodded solemnly like a soldier in training. Later that night she stood by the window, watching the town's main street fade. A few porch lights flickered to life, small fires against the cold. Somewhere a distant engine roared, then another and another. It was faint at first, but growing louder, closer, like a heartbeat returning. She couldn't see it yet, but something was coming. By dawn the sound had multiplied into a thunderous chorus. Engines, boots, voices, a convoy rolling through the snow-dusted highway. Emily stepped onto her porch, eyes wide, heart racing. Dozens of trucks, jeeps, and motorcycles turned onto her street. Every one of them carried a flag. The neighbors stepped outside, confused, murmuring. Sheriff Daniels parked his cruiser and frowned. "What the hell is this?" The convoy stopped in front of Emily's house, engines idling. Colonel Hayes stepped out first, saluting her with quiet gravity. Behind him stood 100 veterans, not for revenge, but for honor. The veterans lined up shoulder to shoulder, boots crunching against the frozen ground. No words at first, just the sound of flags flapping in the winter wind. Some men held lumber, others carried toolboxes or grocery bags. Emily stood frozen on her porch, one hand clutching her son's shoulder. Eli whispered, "Mom, they're here for you." Colonel Hayes stepped forward and removed his cap. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice carrying through the quiet morning. "When the world looked away, you didn't. That's why we're here." He gestured to the convoy behind him. "We're here to rebuild what you lost." Tears filled her eyes before she could speak. The town gathered fast, drawn by the sound, by curiosity, by disbelief. Some crossed their arms, suspicious. Others simply watched in awe. One man muttered, "This some kind of protest?" But no one answered him. The veterans moved with purpose, unloading wood and supplies. It looked less like a protest and more like a promise being kept. Sheriff Daniels approached, his hat pulled low. "You can't just set up here." Hayes met his gaze, calm and unflinching. "We're not setting up, Sheriff. We're serving. Behind them, hammers began to ring, saws cutting through the morning chill. The sheriff hesitated, then stepped back slowly. Even he couldn't find a law against gratitude. Emily tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She watched as men she'd never met repaired her porch, fixed her roof, and stacked firewood. Others delivered groceries, blankets, and even toys for Eli. A retired Marine placed a sign on her lawn that read, *Carter House, where kindness still lives. Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, overcome. From the crowd, someone finally broke the silence. She did what real Americans do. She helped her own, said the Marine. His voice carried across the street like a battle cry that turned hearts. One by one, neighbors began to step forward to help. By noon, the street was full of sawdust, laughter, and pride. Reporters arrived, cameras clicking like distant thunder. They asked questions, but Emily didn't give speeches. She just kept working beside the veterans, holding nails, handing boards. This wasn't about attention. It was about belonging again. Each swing of a hammer sounded like America remembering itself. That evening, when the work paused, Colonel Hayes gathered everyone. He held up a folded flag, Jake's flag, and offered it to Emily. "You honored this flag when no one else did," he said. The crowd stood silent as she took it in trembling hands. It wasn't ceremony, it was communion. Eli climbed onto her lap as the sun sank behind the rooftops. The convoy's engines rested, flags glowing gold in the fading light. Emily whispered, "We're home, sweetheart." He looked up at her and asked, "Is this what Dad fought for?" She smiled softly. "Yes, this is exactly what he fought for." When night fell, lights flickered on across the town. Porches, diners, storefronts. Neighbors waved flags again, not because of orders, but because of pride. Emily stood by her window, the folded flag pressed to her heart. Outside, a new sign shone under the porch light. *Where kindness still lives. And for the first time in years, she believed it. By sunrise, the sound of hammers and saws had become the rhythm of the neighborhood. Veterans worked side by side with locals, sleeves rolled up, breath visible in the cold air. The scent of fresh lumber mingled with coffee brewing from Emily's kitchen. Eli handed out doughnuts, giggling as soldiers called him Sergeant Carter. For the first time in years, Maple Ridge felt alive again. Emily stood in her doorway, unsure where to place herself in all the motion. Everywhere she looked, there was purpose. Men laying shingles, women sweeping debris, kids running errands. A flag rose over the front yard, crisp and new, the wind catching it, like a heartbeat. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering, "Daniel, you'd be proud of them." And for a moment it felt like he was there, standing right beside her. Sheriff Daniels arrived again, hat in hand this time. He cleared his throat and nodded toward the worksite. "Didn't think they'd actually fix the place up," he admitted softly. Emily smiled without bitterness. "Sometimes people just need a reason to show up." He tipped his hat, muttered, "Guess you gave him one," and walked away. At noon, the convoy of veterans began repairing the old community park. Swings creaked again, benches were painted, the flagpole straightened. Emily joined them, wiping sweat from her brow despite the chill. The laughter around her wasn't loud. It was grounded, human, hopeful. Every nail struck was like a prayer for a country finding itself again. Reporters returned, asking if this was a protest or movement. Colonel Hayes replied simply, "It's a reminder." He pointed to Emily, who was helping an older vet plant a new oak tree. "She gave when she had nothing," he said, "and that's what this country was built on." Cameras clicked, but what mattered couldn't be captured on film. That night, the local news aired the story under the headline, "The Gas Station Mom." Emily didn't watch it. She sat on the porch with Eli, sipping cocoa, listening to the night. The veterans' trucks were parked neatly along the street, flags resting in silence. She said quietly, "Kindness spreads faster than gossip if you let it." Eli leaned his head on her arm. "Then let's keep spreading it, Mom." The next morning, donations started arriving. Groceries, clothing, envelopes with cash. Even people from other towns showed up with supplies. Emily tried to refuse at first, embarrassed, but Hayes stopped her. "This isn't charity," he said gently. "It's America remembering how to be America." She nodded, tears catching in the corners of her smile. Inside, the house smelled of new paint and sawdust. Her living room was whole again, brighter than before. On the mantel, beside her husband's photo, she placed Jake's folded flag. 2 soldiers, one gone, one saved, bound by her single choice. The weight of that truth humbled her more than any gift could. That afternoon, Jake finally arrived. His body still frail, his steps careful, but his eyes steady. He handed her a small photograph of a little girl smiling in uniform. "My daughter," he said softly. "You reminded me what she'd want me to be." Emily hugged him, and the crowd fell silent around them. Hayes raised his voice above the hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "welcome to Carter House, where kindness still lives." Applause broke out, rolling like thunder through the chilly air. Flags waved again, brighter than before, and for the first time the town of Maple Ridge looked like home again. Weeks passed, and winter softened its grip. What started as one act of kindness had turned into a movement. The Honor Home Foundation stayed in Maple Ridge, hiring local veterans for projects. Abandoned buildings became shelters, and the town square filled with life again. Emily found herself at the center of something bigger than survival. She accepted a position as community coordinator, offered by Colonel Hayes. $48,000 a year, more than she had ever earned. But it wasn't the paycheck that mattered. It was the purpose behind it. Her days were filled with calls, meetings, and visits to veterans' families. For the first time, her work healed instead of drained her. Eli carried his father's flag to school for show and tell. When the teacher asked why it was special, he said, "Because it means helping people." The class fell quiet, and even the teacher wiped a tear from her eye. That night, Emily tucked him in and whispered, "You make your dad proud every day." He smiled sleepily. "You too, Mom." The national news picked up the story. Headlines read, "Small town rebuilt by 100 veterans after one woman's kindness." Letters poured in from all over the country, from widows, soldiers, and single parents. Each one carried the same message. "You reminded us who we are." Emily read them by the window each night, heart full and humble. But even with the attention, she kept her life simple. She still worked part-time at the diner, still walked Eli to school every morning. People who once ignored her now greeted her with warmth and pride. Flags hung fresh on porches, and laughter filled the diner again. The heart of Maple Ridge beat steady and strong. One afternoon, as snow began to fall again, she visited the town's memorial. Rows of names etched into stone glistened with frost and sunlight. She knelt by her husband's name and placed her gloved hand against it. "Daniel," she whispered, "I didn't fix the world, but I helped our corner of it." The wind stirred softly, like an answer only she could hear. When she stood to leave, a young veteran sat alone nearby, trembling. His hand shook as he stared at the ground. Emily approached quietly and offered him a cup of coffee. "You don't have to talk," she said. "You just don't have to be alone." He nodded, eyes wet, whispering, "Thank you, ma'am." That night she walked home under a sky full of stars. Her porch light glowed like a beacon in the dark. She could hear the laughter of veterans from the Honor Home shelter down the street. This, she realized, was what her husband meant by freedom worth fighting for. It wasn't politics, it was people caring for people. Inside, the flag above Eli's bed swayed faintly in the draft. She brushed her fingers across it and felt its familiar, sacred texture. Her life was no longer about getting by. It was about giving back. Every heartbeat in that house carried the same quiet vow: never look away again. In the final scene of her story, the camera would fade on her porch light. The sign still read Carter House, where kindness still lives. Emily's voice would echo softly over the image of waving flags. She thought she was saving a stranger, but maybe she was saving what's best about America. And as the screen faded to black, have you or someone you love ever had to prove people wrong because of prejudice? Tell us in the comments. Spring arrived quietly, melting the last of winter's edges around Maple Ridge. The air smelled of soil and pine again, and the river under the bridge ran free. Emily walked through town with her coffee, watching neighbors repaint fences and hang flags. What had once been a place of silence now pulsed with laughter and hammering. Her single act of compassion had grown roots she never expected. The Honor Home Foundation made Maple Ridge its first national model town. Billboards read, "No veteran forgotten. No family alone." Buses rolled in weekly, bringing veterans to help rebuild other struggling communities. Emily stood beside Colonel Hayes as they welcomed each new team. "This is what faith looks like when it rolls up its sleeves," he told her. Jake Townsend became one of her closest friends. He moved into a small cabin near the edge of town, volunteering full-time. When people thanked him, he'd smile and say, "Don't thank me. Thank the lady with $10 and a bigger heart." Sometimes he and Emily would share coffee on her porch, quiet and content. Two souls mended by the same thread of mercy. Eli's school hosted a Veterans Day ceremony that year. He insisted his mom be a guest speaker, holding her hand the whole time. When she stepped on stage, she didn't read from notes or look at cameras. She simply said, "My husband fought for freedom. My son reminds me what it means, and a stranger showed me it's still alive." The applause felt like a prayer whispered by a nation rediscovering itself. Afterward, an elderly man in a wheelchair rolled toward her. He wore a worn cap embroidered with Korea veteran and tears in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, voice trembling, "you reminded me why we served." Emily knelt and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "No, sir," she said. "You reminded us why we should never stop serving." That night, a letter arrived from the governor's office. An invitation to a state ceremony honoring citizens of exceptional service. She stared at it for a long time before setting it aside. Recognition wasn't the point. The work was. Instead, she donated the honorarium to honor Home's next project. Word of her choice spread quickly, sparking a movement online. #BeLikeEmily. Videos surfaced of people helping veterans, families, and neighbors across the country. One clip showed kids cleaning up a park with the caption, "Kindness still lives here." Emily smiled when she saw it, knowing how far a single heartbeat could echo. Even across states, the sound of hammers seemed to follow. Reporters called her the woman who rebuilt America's faith. She didn't correct them, but in her heart she knew better. She hadn't rebuilt faith. She just reminded people it was still standing. Faith didn't live in headlines or speeches. It lived in small choices, the kind made in the dark when no one's watching. One evening she sat on her porch with Jake, watching the sunset burn gold. He looked at her and said, "You know, I used to think this country forgot about us." Emily sipped her coffee, eyes on the horizon. "It didn't forget," she said softly. "It just needed someone to remember." They sat in silence after that, both smiling, both grateful. The world felt at peace, if only for a while. Inside, Eli practiced his reading by the fire, sounding out every word of a book titled Brave Hearts. Every so often, he'd glance at his mother and grin, proud of how far they'd come. Emily looked at the folded flag above the mantel, 2 soldier stories bound in one house. Her heart was steady now, filled with something deeper than happiness, purpose. And outside, under a sky streaked with twilight, the porch light glowed like hope itself. Months later, the Honor Home convoy set out again, this time without snow, but with spring sun overhead. Dozens of trucks bearing flags stretched down the highway, engines humming like a hymn. Emily stood with Eli, watching them go, her hand raised in farewell. They weren't leaving her behind. They were carrying her story forward. A single act had become a legacy. Across the nation, news stories followed the veterans' trail of compassion. From Pennsylvania to Oklahoma, they rebuilt homes, fixed schools, and repaired hope. At every stop, someone would mention the woman in Montana who started it all. Emily always smiled when she heard, not from pride, but disbelief. She had only meant to save one man. One morning, a letter arrived from a young mother in Texas. She wrote, "I was going to give up until I saw your story. Now I'm helping a veteran in my town." Emily read it aloud to Eli, her voice trembling with emotion. He hugged her tightly and said, "See, Mom? You're like Dad now, helping people all over." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Maybe we both are." Jake began leading outreach for veterans with PTSD, starting groups in nearby towns. He often said that Emily saved more than his life. She saved his belief in humanity. Every month he'd visit her house for dinner, where Eli called him Uncle Jake. Their bond wasn't built by blood, but by shared redemption. It was the kind of family forged in faith, not coincidence. Colonel Hayes visited once more to deliver news. "Washington wants to recognize Maple Ridge as a model of civic renewal," he said. Emily smiled politely. "Sir, we didn't do it for medals." Hayes grinned. "I know. That's exactly why you deserve one." Then he saluted her not as a superior, but as an equal. The following weekend, the whole town gathered for a community barbecue. Flags hung from porches, music played, and laughter carried through the hills. Emily looked around at the faces, neighbors, veterans, children, all together. She realized this was the America her husband dreamed about, one not built by politics or power, but by people choosing decency. As night fell, lanterns floated down the river in memory of the fallen. Each light drifted slowly, reflecting in the current like a ribbon of stars. Emily placed one in the water for Daniel and one for Jake's daughter. She whispered, "Thank you," to the rippling glow as it moved away. Behind her, the town stood silent, united by reverence. Later, back at home, Emily tucked Eli into bed for the last time before he turned 8. He asked, "Mom, are heroes real?" She smiled. "They're not born, sweetheart. They're made one choice at a time." He closed his eyes, whispering, "Then you're one." Her answer came as a kiss on his forehead and a tear she didn't bother to hide. Before sleeping, she stepped onto the porch and looked out at the quiet town. The signs still read Carter House, where kindness still lives. Flags swayed softly under the moonlight, and crickets hummed their night-time hymn. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, America, for remembering yourself." Somewhere in that stillness, it felt like the country whispered back. The camera would pull back now, slow, wide, silent, over Maple Ridge at night. A single porch light glows, steady and unwavering, against the dark. Narration fades in, her voice warm and proud. She thought she was saving a stranger, but maybe she was saving what's best about America. Then the screen fades to black. Have you or someone you love ever had to prove people wrong because of prejudice? Tell us in the comments. Summer came to Maple Ridge like a quiet promise. The fields bloomed golden, and the air carried the sound of church bells and laughter. Emily's front yard, once worn and empty, now overflowed with life. Kids playing tag, veterans grilling burgers, neighbors stopping to chat. The Carter House had become more than a home. It was a gathering place, a symbol of what happens when one heart chooses courage over comfort. Eli sat on the porch steps, polishing his small wooden flag. He was taller now, his eyes bright with the same calm strength his father once carried. "Mom," he said, "Mister, Jake's teaching me how to fix bikes for the other kids." Emily smiled, watching Jake wave from across the street, a hammer in one hand. "That's good, honey. That's how you build a better world, one fix at a time." Down the street, Colonel Hayes spoke with city officials about expanding on her home. He wanted to turn an abandoned warehouse into a vocational center for veterans. Emily volunteered to help manage it, promising to keep the mission personal. "This isn't just about jobs," she told them. "It's about giving people a reason to wake up proud." The mayor nodded. "That's the America people miss, Mrs. Carter. You helped bring it back." That afternoon, the town gathered for a small ceremony under the old oak tree. Children sang "America the Beautiful," voices shaky but sincere. Jake stood beside Emily, leaning on his cane, eyes glistening. When they finished, he whispered, "You started all this with $10. Emily smiled. "Guess it was a pretty good investment." After the crowd dispersed, a woman approached her, young, nervous, holding a baby. "I came from Kansas," she said softly. "I lost my husband overseas, too. When I saw your story, I packed up and came here." Emily's heart clenched. She touched the woman's arm gently. "You're home now," she said. "We take care of our own here." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. As the sun dipped low, the veterans began lowering the flag for the evening. Emily helped fold it, crisp and precise, every crease deliberate. Jake handed it to her and said, "You taught us how to honor this again." She shook her head. "No, Jake, you all reminded me what it means." In the golden light, the flag seemed to glow between them. Later that evening, the children played in the front yard as the adults shared stories. A sense of ease had settled over Maple Ridge, the kind earned, not inherited. For once, no one argued about politics or headlines. They just talked about family, about work, about hope. Simple things, the kind a nation is built on. Eli ran up, holding a jar full of fireflies. "Look, Mom," he said, his grin wide. "It's like the sky came down to visit us." She laughed softly. "Don't let them go just yet. We need a little more light tonight." He nodded solemnly and placed the jar on the porch railing. Tiny sparks flickered against the dark, like the heartbeat of a dream. Jake leaned back in his chair, hat over his eyes. "You ever think about how it all started?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Every day, but I don't regret a thing." He smiled. "Neither do I. You gave me a second chance." She looked at the sky and whispered, "We gave it to each other." When the last light faded and the stars took over, she looked at her house, rebuilt, alive, full of laughter. It wasn't just wood and nails anymore. It was proof that kindness still lives, that goodness still wins, that America still takes care of its own. And in that quiet moment, Emily Carter knew her husband's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. His spirit lived in every flag that waved, every heart that dared to hope again. Autumn came softly, painting Maple Ridge in amber and gold. The air smelled of wood smoke and apple pie as leaves danced across the streets. Our home had grown far beyond the town, now spanning 15 states. But Emily still started each morning the same way: coffee, porch, prayer. She no longer asked for strength. She simply gave thanks. Eli rode his bike to school, his backpack decorated with a small American flag. Every morning he stopped to help raise the one on Main Street before heading off. The same clerk who once called her crazy now waved at him, smiling proudly. Time, Emily thought, had a way of healing even the quiet wounds of shame. Kindness had turned judgment into pride, doubt into belonging. One crisp morning she received a letter from the White House. It wasn't a medal or award, just a handwritten note from the president himself. He thanked her for reminding the country what freedom looks like when it wears compassion. She framed it beside her husband's photo, not out of pride, but gratitude, because recognition meant people were still listening. Jake passed away that winter, peacefully in his sleep. The town held a full military service, attended by veterans from across the nation. Emily folded the flag herself this time, hands steady, heart full. When she placed it on his casket, she whispered, "Rest easy, Sergeant." Mission accomplished. Snow began to fall as the bugle played taps, echoing through the valley. That night, Eli asked, "Mom, why do we always give them flags?" She thought for a moment and said, "Because it's the one thing that never stops waving, even when we can't." He nodded, understanding in the way children sometimes do. Then he added softly, "Someday I'll help people too." And she smiled, seeing her husband's courage alive in his son. Years passed, and the Carter house became a local landmark. Tourists came to see the porch, the sign, the flag. But Emily didn't care for fame. She cared for the people who left changed. Each visitor took a little of Maple Ridge's spirit with them, and that, she knew, was how nations heal, one story at a time. On the 20th anniversary of that night, a memorial was built near the gas station. It read, "Dedicated to Emily Carter, whose last $10 reminded us what America stands for." Eli, now a grown man, gave the speech. "My mother didn't save a veteran," he said. "She saved a generation from forgetting." The crowd rose to its feet, tears and applause blending in one proud chorus. After the ceremony, he placed a single rose beside the plaque and looked toward the sky. Somewhere beyond the clouds, he hoped his parents were watching. Then he turned toward the small town that had changed everything. Flags rippled along every street, children played by the river, and laughter filled the air. Kindness, he realized, was now Maple Ridge's inheritance. That evening the golden light fell across the Carter porch one last time. The sign was weathered but strong, letters still clear, "Where kindness still lives." The wind lifted the flag gently, as if saluting all those who had carried it forward. And for the first time in many years the house stood still, but never silent. It breathed with memory, with gratitude, with love. The camera would pull back one final time, rising over Maple Ridge as dusk turned to night. A soft instrumental of "America the Beautiful" played beneath Emily's voice, steady, timeless, eternal. She had $10 to her name, and she spent it saving the man who once fought for her freedom. Then, fading to black, America still takes care of its own. And finally, her voice one last time. Have you or someone you love ever had to prove people wrong because of prejudice? Tell us in the comments. Years passed, but Maple Ridge never forgot where it began. The rebuilt diner still opened each morning with the smell of bacon and hope. The gas station, once the place where a man nearly died, now bore a bronze plaque. It read, "On this ground, compassion proved stronger than fear." Tourists would stop, take photos, and often stand in silence afterward. Eli, now in his 30s, walked that same stretch of concrete one quiet afternoon. He traced his hand over the plaque, feeling the grooves of each word. Beside him stood his own daughter, Grace, her eyes full of curiosity. "Daddy," she asked, "did Grandma really save that man?" He smiled softly. "She did. But more than that, she saved who we were." Grace looked around the small town her father grew up in. Flags waved gently from porches, and laughter echoed from the community park. Everything here seemed ordinary and yet sacred. "Was she scared?" Grace asked. "When she gave him her money?" Eli nodded. "Of course. But courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing it anyway." At the rebuilt Carter house, Eli pushed open the front door, the familiar creak greeting him. The house smelled of pine and coffee, just as it always had. Photos lined the walls, his parents, Jake, Colonel Hayes, the veterans, and the town. In the center hung the same sign, "Restored once more, where kindness still lives." Grace reached out and traced the word kindness with her finger, whispering it like a prayer. They sat on the porch as the sun set over the valley. Fireflies blinked like tiny lanterns just as they had when he was a boy. "Grandma used to say that even one small light can change a dark world," Eli said. Grace leaned her head on his arm. "Then we should keep it lit forever," he smiled. "That's the plan." Later that night, Eli opened an old wooden box he'd kept hidden for years. Inside lay Emily's folded flag, Jake's photo, and her first diner namatag. He lifted the flag and pressed it to his chest, the fabric still holding her warmth. In that moment he understood that legacy wasn't written in books. It lived in choices. Every generation had to earn it again. Outside, the town square glowed under new lamplight. Children ran with sparklers while veterans gathered around a fire pit, sharing stories. Music played faintly, a local band performing God Bless America. Eli stood by the window, watching through the glass, tears soft and unashamed. His mother's dream hadn't just survived, it had multiplied. He stepped outside and walked to the oak tree at the center of town. Beneath it stood a new memorial stone, carved with simple words, in honor of Emily Carter, who reminded America that kindness is strength. Eli placed his hand on the cool granite and whispered, "Mission complete, Mom." The wind stirred gently, and somewhere in that sound he could almost hear her voice. The church bells rang in the distance as lanterns floated up into the sky. Families, soldiers, and children all released them together, a sky full of tiny suns. Each one carried a message. Thank you for believing. The lights rose higher and higher until they became one with the stars. And for a moment it was impossible to tell where heaven ended and hope began. Eli lifted Grace into his arms as they watched the sky. She whispered, "Grandma's up there, isn't she?" He nodded, smiling through the ache. "Yeah, and I think she's proud." The porch light flickered behind them, glowing steady against the dark. It never went out, not for a single night in all those years. Decades later, Maple Ridge had grown into a thriving, peaceful town, but its soul remained unchanged. Tourists came not for spectacle, but for something they said they could feel. The kind of peace you don't find in cities, the kind born of hard lessons and open hearts. The Carter house had become a living museum, kept just as Emily left it. And each morning someone still lit the porch lantern before dawn. School children took field trips to the Honor Home Memorial Park. There, teachers told them the story of the woman with $10 who saved a veteran. They listened wide-eyed, some skeptical, until they saw the plaque and flag themselves. By the end, even the quietest students whispered, "I would have helped, too." That was how legacy spread, not by preaching, but by planting seeds. The national network aired a documentary titled "One Act of Courage." It showed footage of Maple Ridge, that rebuilt homes and generations of veterans still serving. In the final scene, a narrator's voice said, "America isn't perfect, but its heart beats strongest when ordinary people choose to care." Millions watched, many crying quietly in their living rooms. Kindness had once again crossed every border, every difference, every doubt. Grace, now grown, took over as the director of the Honor Home Foundation. She expanded it internationally, rebuilding villages for Allied veterans overseas. When asked by reporters why she chose this path, she always gave the same answer: "Because someone once proved to my grandmother that compassion could save a nation." Every time she said it, she felt Emily's presence beside her. On Veterans Day, Grace returned to Maple Ridge for the annual lantern ceremony. Thousands filled the streets, candles glowing in reverent silence. As she stood on stage, she felt the same wind that once carried her grandmother's flag. She lifted her eyes to the crowd and said simply, "Kindness built this town. Let it build the world." The applause rolled like thunder across the valley. Among the crowd, elderly veterans saluted with trembling hands. Some wore patches from wars long past. Others carried photos of fallen friends. Every salute, every tear, every word felt like a heartbeat from a grateful nation. The flag above the Carter house waved in the night wind, strong as ever. Even time couldn't wear down what love had built. When the ceremony ended, Grace walked alone down the familiar road to the old gas station. The pumps were long gone, replaced by a small stone monument surrounded by flowers. She stood there quietly, imagining that cold night decades ago. Her grandmother, scared, tired, and still choosing to help. It was such a small decision, and yet it changed everything. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out 10 crumpled dollars. Gently she placed them at the base of the plaque, whispering, "For the next person who needs it." A tear slipped down her cheek as she smiled toward the stars. Above her, the night sky seemed to shimmer, as if heaven itself was saluting her back. Legacy, she realized, wasn't about being remembered. It was about being repeated. The camera would rise now, panning over Maple Ridge one last time, rebuilt, peaceful, united. Church bells rang as the morning light touched the flag over Carter House. In voiceover, Grace's words carried softly through the dawn. She thought she was saving a man, but she saved a nation's soul. The flag waved once more, steady as a heartbeat. As the screen faded to black, a final message appeared. America still takes care of its own, because people like Emily Carter reminded how. And below that, her immortal question glowed in white letters across the screen. Have you or someone you love ever had to prove people wrong because of prejudice? Tell us in the comments. Then silence, the kind that feels less like an ending and more like a vow. 50 years after that cold night at Miller's gas station, the town of Maple Ridge stood quiet under a sky of silver clouds. The oak tree had grown wide and strong, its roots deep in the same soil where Emily once knelt beside a stranger. The Carter house still stood, freshly painted, the porch lantern glowing as it had every night since. Time had changed faces, buildings, and roads, but not the spirit that held this place together. It was as if kindness itself had signed an oath never to leave. Grace, now gray-haired but graceful, walked the familiar streets with her grandson, Luke. He carried a folded flag in his hands, the same one passed through generations. "Grandma," he asked, "is it true all this started because of $10? She nodded, smiling softly. $10 and a choice to care. He looked at the flag with new reverence, understanding that it was more than cloth. They stopped at the memorial by the gas station, where flowers still bloomed year-round. The plaque shimmered faintly in the sunlight. Even one act of compassion can awaken a nation. Grace ran her hand over the engraving, her reflection shimmering in the bronze. "Your great-grandmother was younger than I am now when she made that choice," she said. Luke traced the words beside hers and whispered, "Then I'll make mine someday, too." Back at Carter House, family and townspeople gathered for the annual remembrance dinner. Photographs lined the tables, veterans, children, and families once touched by Honor Home. Laughter mixed with tears, old stories told like sacred scripture. Each generation had its own version of that night, but the ending never changed. It always came back to the same truth. Kindness is the most enduring form of strength. Colonel Hayes's portrait hung near the dining room window, his gaze eternal and proud. Beneath it was Jake's photo, smiling in uniform, and beside that, Emily's. Every face seemed to watch over them, guardians of the values they restored. Grace stood to make a toast, her voice steady, though her eyes shimmered. "To those who served, and to those who still choose to," she said, raising her glass. Later that night, Luke asked to light the lantern himself, a task always done by the eldest. Grace nodded and handed him the match. "Be gentle," she said. He struck it, the flame flaring small but fierce, and touched it to the wick. The glow spread across the porch, painting the flag in soft gold. "Now," Grace whispered, "you're part of the promise, too." The two stood silently as the light danced on their faces. Wind rustled through the trees, carrying faint echoes of laughter from decades past. It was easy to imagine the veterans still walking those streets, unseen but ever present. Luke looked up at his grandmother. "Do you think they know we still remember?" She smiled, eyes glistening. "They know. That's why the light never goes out." As night deepened, the townspeople began placing candles along the main road. One by one, flames flickered to life, a river of fire stretching through Maple Ridge. Each candle bore a small tag with a name: soldiers, mothers, neighbors, strangers. The sight was breathtaking, a living testament to the power of ordinary goodness. The town had found a way to turn memory into motion. When the church bells rang, Grace joined the crowd at the center of town. She held Luke's hand as a choir of children began to sing, "This land is your land." Voices trembled, but never faltered, echoing through the crisp night air. And as the final note lingered, a gust of wind lifted every flag at once. It was as if the heavens themselves stood in salute. The camera would rise one last time, capturing Maple Ridge blanketed in candlelight. From above it would look like a constellation, a town shining like the heart of a nation. Grace's voice would carry softly, firm yet tender. She thought she was saving a stranger, but she was saving the promise of who we are. Then, as the music swells and fades, the final message appears. America still takes care of its own, because people like Emily Carter never let the light go out. Fade to black. End of story.